World economic leaders push back against the idea of decoupling. How would that affect countries, especially developing ones? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. For the first time since the coronavirus pandemic, China hosted an in-person World Economic Forum in Tianjin, known as the Summer Davos. The three-day event fostered dialogue on innovation, entrepreneurship, and global cooperation to bolster economic growth. CGTN's Zheng has our report.
Generating insights and calling for innovation and collaboration. This year's Summer Davos gathered over 1,500 business leaders and public figures to address the world's most pressing challenges, including the climate, cost of living, energy, and food crisis. The event also released insights on the energy transition, emerging technologies, trade competitiveness, and the future of healthcare.
We discussed about the power of AI. But we also discussed about autonomous vehicles, and the fact that the Chinese government is pushing the commercialization of level 3 autonomous vehicles, I think is a signal about the innovation we're seeing here. So that's something which I think is important.
And the forum brought more than just talk, launching or advancing more than 25 high-impact initiatives, serving as platforms for ongoing collaboration.
We had an opportunity to launch and advance 25 initiatives. So we have been walking the talk. We haven't just been discussing, we also seen tangible results come.
Many participants agreed this year's Summer Davos is not only a window for the world to see China's commitment to opening up, but also a platform for countries to exchange views and seek cooperation.
Well, participants hope that the spirit of innovation and cooperation seen over the past few days at the forum will help meet the demands of the future and then drive the development of the global economy. Zheng Chunying, CGTN, Tianjin.
Okay, to discuss the forum and world economy, let's bring in our panel. From Beijing, Qiang is Assistant Director of the International Monetary Institute at Renmin University of China. Also in Beijing, Gong is Professor of Economics at the University of International Business and Economics. Zongyuan Zoe Liu is a Fellow for International Political Economy at the Council on Foreign Relations. She joins us from New York. And from Los Angeles, Ryan Patel is a Global Business Executive. Welcome to all of you. John Gong, the World Economic Forum just ended in the Chinese city of Tianjin. That's the first in-person event that's been held, event of its kind, since the pandemic. What's the significance of this forum? What does it tell us?
Well, I think the significance of this forum can be exemplified by the speech delivered by the Premier, Mr. Qiang. And he raised 4 points, and I think the most significant point is that China's continued commitment to opening up, China's commitment to foreign companies operating in China, as well as I think his very significant call for a free and open global economy. I think he's directly addressing this issue that China is trying to avoid a scenario where the world is bifurcated. There's no such thing as two camps of the global economic order. And I think that China very much is committed to keep integrated into the global economy, as well as globalization as well. I think this is a very stark message from a series of recent messages from delivered from the West in terms of trying to contain China, as well as in a sense. In my view, is simply decoupling from China, although it's framed as a de-risking from China.
John, is this an indication that China is now firmly past the era of the pandemic?
Oh, I think we've put this behind us for good. I mean, from a medical perspective, you still see these, experts and people in the medical field, people in the pandemic studies. I mean, they they studied this sort of from a purely medical point of view, and it's in my view, actually, according to what I've read, it's impossible to 100% eradicate, these viruses. It's always going to be there. But in terms of its impact on society, I think we have put this behind us. It's, I don't see any impact at all on the economy and people's lives anymore. You look at the travel data here right now. You look at the tourism industry. I was just recently in a very touristy place in Yunnan province in China. The place is packed, actually. So from an economy point of view, I think it's all behind us. Thank goodness it's finally behind us after 3 years.
Right, Qiang, welcome to the show. As we just heard in that report by our reporter in Tianjin, it was not just talk. The forum launched initiatives and what it called platforms for collaborations. What can you tell us about that?
Well, if you know the details about this forum, you see many foreign leaders that they come to China. They're really not here just for talk. They're for the do. For example, the Barbados president, when she comes to China, we've been signed many agreements with them, most of them concerning the trade and businesses. Everybody knows China and Barbados. Even Barbados is far away from China, but we've been cooperating with each other many fronts. For example, in Barbados, they have been paying a lot of attention to green development, so they have the Green Efficiency Center in the Caribbean countries in there, and also they've been center for the Caribbean Development Bank. So China is also one of the major players in the international assistance and also the development assistance. And also China tried to provide them with digital infrastructures because they're paying attention to digital economy and digital equipment. And also China is going to import lots of agriculture, especially tropical agriculture products from Barbados. The same story happening with China, between China and Vietnam. China and Vietnam are talking about the connectivities in the railway and the power transmission, and also the consumption cooperation. And also similar with New Zealand, Chinese president and also Chinese premier talking to New Zealand, prime minister, talking about cooperation in the digital development and also green development as well as agriculture cooperation. So see, these things make the things flowing. The dynamic is here. Momentum is very strong. So I think China is providing a platform open to the rest of the world with no labeling, with not taking sides, but just when you want to cooperate with China, when you try to cooperate with other countries, and here is a platform, open and safe.
Zoe, great to have you with us. A big welcome to you as well. Now, we've been talking about decoupling. More recently, it's been called de-risking. This was, of course, launched by the United States and its allies. It's been criticized. It was criticized at the forum by people who attended that. And at a time when the world is facing a recession, there's high inflation rates in many countries. I mean, what kind of impact would decoupling have on countries around the world, especially developing countries? Hi, Zoe. No, Zoe can't hear me. Okay, let me move to Ryan Patel. Ryan, the Director General at the World Trade Organization, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, she said that if the two big economies, she was referring to the United States and China, if these economies were decoupled, it would cause GDP to shrink by 5% in the longer term. And of course, developing countries would bear the worst of this. I mean, can the world afford this kind of ideologically driven divisions that we are seeing?
Well, I mean, let's be clear. I mean, they're not able to decouple that quickly because they do need each other. And when I mean, what is the best interest for both those countries? They need each other. So I don't think that they will do that. However, when you think about the long term, a U.S. company, a Chinese company, if you think about what they will do in their best interest, if you look at what U.S. companies are doing in China that we've seen in reports that maybe there is less investments. However, if it is in their best interest, Anand, that U.S. companies were typically then, if it hits all their stakeholders and profitability being a big deal, I don't see them moving away from a situation that if it is that applicable to be in China. However, we're seeing the competition continue, and that includes with China partnering with the U.S., maybe within Europe. So I feel like we're seeing a little more competitiveness going, and it's a fight for the companies itself to see what is the best, to take the politics aside for a second now, the U.S. and China out of this decoupling conversation. Question becomes, who gives the best profitability to stakeholders for many of these companies? And that is the conversation. And as of right now, it doesn't make sense for both countries to decouple immediately. Over the long term, yeah, if it's I still think that they will be in partnership together of some sort, but maybe not to the degree they are. But I think it'll be in a relationship where it will be a win-win. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in a conversation.
Right, Ryan, you mentioned politics there, and that was something that was referenced by the Chinese Premier, Qiang. He said China is firmly opposed to what he called the artificial politicization of economic and trade issues. I mean, is that what's happening here, that politics is winning over pragmatic economic decisions?
I think it causes a pause. If you think of the business community on both sides, like if you give some kind of clout to uncertainty, it makes corporations decide, well, let's see how this plays out, or is it detrimental to my benefit? Now, in the short term, you can kind of get away with that. But if you block a supply chain to a certain place where a company needs this, it will be detrimental to who? The company, to the citizens, the consumers. And without providing another route, it hurts. It kind of is an inflicted ruin to that specific economy. So I kind of feel like some of this is just like politics, as you were mentioning. It is kind of posturing on both sides of what deal needs to be had, or what can it be. Again, if it's a long-term conversation and this is the way it's going to go, we will see the effects a lot more quicker than we think long-term.
Okay, and I'm glad to tell you that Zoe is back with us. Zoe, we're talking about decoupling, or de-risking as it's now called. This was something that was introduced by the United States and its allies. And as I said, you know, this is a time when the world is facing a recession in certain parts. There are countries facing high inflation. What impact would this have?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, and I apologize for the technical issues on my end. But going back to your question, yes, you're right. You know, right now in the West, in particular, there is the concern about emerging potential economic recession. Despite that, you know, inflation has been sort of held under control here in the United States, and a potential or a looming economic or financial decoupling with China, or more broadly speaking, the global South, would, on the one hand, exacerbating the pressure of the Western central banks dealing with inflation, and then on the other hand, it would also cause a lot of pressure on the consumers. So, you know, I would also want to take a step back by saying that actually it is not going to be easy for economic decouple from China, because on the one hand, China is the largest trading economy in the world, and then on the other hand, despite all these decoupling discussions, actually, even on the U.S.-China trade side, bilateral trade numbers actually broke a record high last year. So from that perspective, we would have to separate the talks of politics versus the reality.
Right. And Zoe, one other thing, the WTO Director General, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, she talked about China's role in global trade. This is what she had to say. Let's listen.
China is probably one of the poster children for the success of the multilateral trading system. Since it joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, China has done phenomenally well. Its per capita income has increased over 12 times. It's now the largest exporter in the world. It's the second largest importer. So on all counts, China has done extremely well, and as everyone says, it's critical to the world economy.
So Zoe, if we look at some of the projections that have come out of the IMF, for instance, or the World Bank, I mean, it's been revised downwards, world economic growth, that is. So how important, when we look at Chinese economic growth, how important would it be for China to drive global economic growth?
If we look at the historical trajectory since China joined the WTO in 2001, actually China has been a major growth driver since then. And in particular, during the global financial crisis, China contributed tremendously to pull the global economy out of the recession to a very large extent. And since 2010, China surpassed Germany to be the world's largest exporting countries. So from that perspective, China indeed has contributed to global growth. However, I would also wanted to say that right now China also faces a lot of domestic constraints from demand, from demographics, from local government debt, or the looming challenge of de-risking or decoupling.
Okay, we are going to take a quick break. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.
The nature of business is to bring value. Business activities in Europe, Asia, and the US reach consumers globally. Trade, manufacturing, energy, high-tech, real estate, consumption. We give an expanded view on global business and how it covers, influences, or relates to the whole world. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Welcome back. On this edition of The Heat, we're discussing the World Economic Forum in Tianjin in China. Well, let's get back to our panel right now. And Qiang, we're talking about Chinese economic growth and the projection for this year. Premier Qiang said China will achieve its growth target. It's on course to reach that target of 5% this year. What are your thoughts on that? What are your expectations? And what does this also tell us about China's emergence from the pandemic?
Well, as our colleagues, John just mentioned, if you go around China, if you go to all kinds of the tourism resort, you find that there's mountain people, which is a Chinese saying, say everywhere is packed. And also if you go to, all kinds of hospitality industry, and also you go to the manufacturing industry, you find everything is getting, recovering. You see here, well, when China just reopened it at the beginning of the year or the end of last year, we see there is an effect called, the remedy effect, which means everybody needs to repair its balance sheet and then restore the cash flow and then restore their expectation for the future. And then economy is going to pick up the pace. As I said earlier in the beginning of the year, the thing is going to be slower in the beginning and then try to pick up with the pace. And now we've been seeing the pace is getting, faster and faster. And also, I think, according to Premier Li's statement, if China in the future keep on growing at the 5% or even 4.5% of a year, still every year you will see the gross amount will be the gross amount of India, Indonesia, plus Vietnam, this hot regions grow together for a year. And also, even China are growing at 4% or 4.5% a year. In the next 5 years, I think the total gross amount of China will be larger than the American's economy after 10 or 15 years. So I think the growth potential and the growth expectation for China is still phenomenal. So you got to be very confident about that.
John Gong, the Premier also talked about China opening up, and that's an expression, a term rather, that we've heard very often in the past. What does it mean in practical terms?
What it means is that China has to continue to adopt these measures to attract foreign direct investment, to implement the free trade pilot projects across port cities in China, to replicate experiences in Hainan Island. These are the things that China's government could continue to do. I do want to point to one very important development, probably people haven't been paying much attention to. China has recently submitted an application to the CPTPP, right? That's called Comprehensive and Progressive TPP, This is an organization that was once started by the United States, but the Trump administration decided to withdraw from it. In a sense, it's a free trade organization, a free trade agreement organization, currently being led by countries like Canada and Japan. This trade agreement sets a very high bar on a country's economy in terms of opening up, in terms of sticking to the free market economies, in terms of coherent regulatory frameworks, and all these things that are required to be a member of a high level of free trade agreement. The fact that China decided to submit this application means that it is aspiring to these goals. It's doing concrete things, doing domestic reforms to implement things that meet the standard of the CPTPP. So what it means is that China is really going to open up and be a country like a CPTPP member country. We're talking about countries like Canada, New Zealand, Japan. These are highly open countries. So I think in a few more years, China is going to move in that direction. There's no doubt in my mind that the current administration in Beijing is fully committed to this open door policy path, and in terms of the countries being free and open, I think the event that I just mentioned is its best example of supporting this evidence.
Right. Ryan, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, this has been one of the main points of contention between the United States and China, and it goes back several years. But when we hear what the Premier has said now, again, reiterated that China will be opening up, where do you see it heading?
Yeah, I think what John mentioned there, let me pick on his words because he was obviously close to it. It's how are they continuing to adopt? Because to me, if China can continue to make strides to that way and to continue to adopt and evolve, it only is going to be in their best interest. And I think part of the reason why I think they are given this rhetoric, and I believe that they believe that it is a must. This is not something that to be able to keep the economy going, to be able to feed the domestic consumption as well, they do need more trade. They also realize that the way that they've done business maybe 10 years ago, the way that the economy was to what the future is going forward is going to be quite different. And you think about the technology race that's happening in the edge, right? China, the U.S., many of these major economies are pouring into the tech aspect to be more efficient, to be able to be more useful to its society and economic purposes as well. This is not going to happen by itself, and it's not going to be happening by just one country. So that sharing, the trading, that to be able to have the assets will move the evolution of each economy a lot forward and a lot faster. And I think that's where you think, when I hear those words, I think that's the mindset I'm hearing.
Zoe, when you look at China's expanding relationship with the developing world, I mean, if we look at this forum, Saudi Arabia was there, and there are growing ties between Saudi Arabia and China. In fact, there are growing ties between much of the Middle East and China right now. What does that tell us? What's the significance of it?
I would say there are two aspects of the growing importance. One is a hydrocarbon importing and exporting relationship. China has, starting from 1994, China changed from a net energy exporting economy to net importing economy. And right now, China is the largest crude oil importing country. And the last year, Saudi Arabia actually became the largest oil supplier to China. So expanding energy relationship, in particular, given China's need for, at least at the current moment, for hydrocarbon, is one aspect of that. And then the other aspect of that would be China's comparative advantage in exporting renewable and clean energy technology to the region, and not just because of the relatively cheaper price, but also relatively high technology component there. And given that a lot of these major Middle Eastern economies, from Saudi Arabia to UAE to Qatar, all have in their strategic visions for transforming into a clean energy society, then there is the renewable component in terms of interdependence there as well. And I'll just conclude by saying that related to a lot of this trade, there is also the use of renminbi in bilateral trading or in international, in China's trade with the region. The idea that the use of renminbi in energy trading is also a very important aspect.
Xu Qiang, in fact, the Premier did mention this. He talked about the acceleration to green transition, as he put it. So what's the status of that? Where are we?
Well, green transition is really very important. It's just not about energy. Just remember, when we have smartphones, right? Smartphones is not just a telephone, make phone calls. It changed a whole lot of things. It's a whole new business, ecology, all kinds of the new jobs, AI and online streaming influencers. It's a new business cycle. And when we talk about the green transition, this is the same deal. Not only by not using, the polluting the gasolines or not using the expensive fossil fuel, but more about how we develop, how we can use the marginal cost near to zero kind of the new energy to boost off of the human beings' economic growth. So I think this is a new opportunity when we're facing the major choke point in technology of the current human being. I think green transition and green development can really provide a new opportunity to everyone, especially to the South countries, giving them a new leap forward chance to catch up with the trend of development.
John Gong, China has also adopted what's known as the dual circulation strategy. What can you tell us about that?
Well, this has been going on for quite some time. China realized that we cannot export ourselves to prosperity. Even though exports continues to play a very important role. I think right now it's about like 11% of China's total GDP. If you divide China's total exports to a GDP number, that's still a very significant number. But if you look at the large economies in history that have been very successful economically, for the most part, it cannot in itself be a mostly export-oriented country. I think even though China's exports have been very successful, but if we continue to relying on exports-oriented parts of the economy and still continue to maintain these huge trade surpluses with many countries, and it's going to run into a political problem, and we know that very well. So I think to further drive this country's growth, most importantly, the domestic part of the economy, domestic consumption has to pick up, and I think that's what the government's policy is mostly about. This double cycling thing. I think in terms of the current status of economy, and I think probably it's more a nuanced picture. The service sectors are definitely recovering; they're doing very well. But I think if you compare, the manufacturing sector with the previous quarter, there are some signs of weakness. Driven by a couple of reasons. For example, domestic economy's consumption hasn't really picked up, in my view, in the manufactured products, and also internationally, demand is also very weak due to the essentially it's a global recession going on right now.
Okay, and we have to leave it there. We have run out of time. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.